Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Moose Club. For this episode tonight, we're going to have a little chat about uh, deficit spending and the national debt. It is about 12 years since the Great Recession, which means it's just about time, in particular with a incoming Democratic president, for the deficit hawks of the Republican Party to come out of the woodwork and all of a sudden act like they just are so distraught and have such a deep concern about the debt and our spending habits as a government. And so we're gonna have a little chat about that tonight. I This topic in particular is just one that I find so much pleasure and humor in. The idea that, because we know what's going to happen, Biden's going to take office. The economy is struggling thanks to COVID, mostly thanks to COVID. It was struggling even before COVID, but that's another discussion. The economy needs a boost, needs stimulus to get back on track when we get past this coronavirus. And this isn't too this is very similar to what not necessarily the scale, but just the circumstances that surround it all, to what Obama had when he took office, following the housing market crash and the Great Recession. What we know what's going to happen. Republicans are going to say, we have a huge deficit. We're however many trillions of dollars in debt. We have to get spending under control. And they're going to try and force the Biden administration to put forth a stimulus bill that doesn't go nearly far enough. And that's going to lead to slower recovery than what is possible and what people would like. And then they're going to campaign, them being the Republicans, campaign on that slower than ideal recovery that is largely caused by their inability to spend money. I will preface all of this with saying that my personal beliefs on the debt, people get so hysterical about the national debt. It is not a concern. Like, it's truly isn't. Like, we were, as a percentage of our GDP, we were in a much worse position post World War II with the national debt. As long as our economy continues to grow and expand, and we keep innovating and creating new business, like, we're fine. Like, it'll be an issue at some point if all things remain the same, but that's just not going to happen. As far as the deficit goes, like, come on, man. Like, this isn't difficult. Like, Paul Krugman wrote about this in 2010 about how the shortcomings of the Obama stimulus and how ostensibly the Obama administration was of the position that, we're not going to be able to get this passed and we need to play ball with Congress. And this is all before he was able to see just the obstruction that came out of the Republican controlled House and Senate. Like, we're going to play ball with them. We're going to compromise. And then we saw what happened. Like, the economy did great under Obama. It recovered slower than what it could have, but I mean, by and large, it did a good job. So, I'll get off my soapbox here because I'll be back. Don't worry. But what do you guys think of what's going to be coming up here when Biden takes office, and the need for economic stimulus, and how that's going to play into, especially if the Republicans hold on to the Senate? What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I think you nailed it perfectly about the ridiculous talking points of the GOP the last two times, soon to be a third time, a Democratic president has taken power after their failed economic policies and two big spending national crises. I think one thing to preface this whole episode about is, like Kyle was saying, about the deficit and debt really by themselves not being a real good indicator of anything. The issue you need to worry about is the debt or deficit getting out of control to in ratio of the GDP. So as long as you're spending and making your economy do well, ideally that should be enough. But we are a country of simpletons, so simple narratives get construed as fact, and it's just bullshit. But
One question, real quick. One question, Joe. If I have to balance my checkbook, why can't the government balance theirs?
I don't know. Go look up a quote from Olivia Munn in the newsroom.
If I can balance my checkbook, why can't the government balance its budget?
Mary, mother of God, am I sick of that insane analogy? Balancing your checkbook is to balancing the budget as driving to the supermarket is to landing on the moon.
See,
Government's there so that it can help its constituents and its country to, form a better union, which, I mean, is very broad, but there's things that this country has to spend money on. If there's a debt, there's a debt. If there's a surplus, there's a surplus. But I think one of the bigger issues that I really want to tie in, hone in on, which we'll get back to later in the episode, is talking about if you're really going to create these narratives and perpetuate this bullshit, at least have history on the right side of your argument. Don't be acting like you are such deficit hawks, and then every time you come out of power, you wake up like you blacked out before and just be like, oh, who ran up all this debt? Like, well, yeah, we'll get into it later in the episode. Like I said, and like you said, I'll get off my soapbox so that Bork can kind of get involved. But there are just insanities that lay in these arguments from the GOP.
Yeah, and before we hear from you, Bork, I'll put this graph up here on the screen. But like it's very like you look at what has like the last surplus we had was under Clinton, and admittedly that likely didn't have very much to do with Clinton's economic policy. Like it was the .com boom. Like anybody who was president in that period was probably going to have a very, very strong economy, most likely. But you can see like with Obama, Great Recession happens, spending, you have to enact a stimulus plan because without it, like things just don't get back on track. But you can see after that, like the spending went down each and every year under Obama. It did creep back up a little bit his last year in office, but for Trump, who has created the self-proclaimed best economy of all time, okay, if that's true, then why if the economy is so great, why are you continuing to run larger and larger and larger deficits? Conventional common sense and just like economic theory, like when the economy does well, you should be running surpluses to build up a surplus for when the economy is doing poorly, which is kind of what Joe was talking about, the whole hypocrisy of everything. Like why are we at we're at a $3 trillion deficit right now? Like
that's out the newest round of
right
stimulus, which I mean there's a very good chance that it's going to be like a there's $5 or $6 trillion deficit next year.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like it's okay to have a deficit that big because coronavirus is just crazy, but
it shouldn't be that bad.
No, it shouldn't be that bad. But the idea of like running a large deficit to kind of offset an economic downturn, like that's fine. It's just we already shouldn't have had we already had $1 trillion deficit before coronavirus. So like in the supposed best economy of all time. So I mean something like square that circle, like make that make sense for me. But Bork, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to kind of pick up on what you were like talking to, I think given how hot the economy apparently had been running for so long, I think everybody kind of expected the I don't know, the shock absorbers to be a little more resilient than they were. And maybe we will find out that this, downturn isn't going to be as bad as it could have been, based on the small stimulus that was given prior to
Right.
the unemployment and all that stuff running out. Like,
The Dow did almost reach 3,000 today, I think.
right, I mean, and maybe that was enough to paper the economy along enough. But yeah, I think just going into the next Biden administration in the near future, I mean, we're just going to have to just completely forget about really what the actual number of the deficit or anything like that is, and focus on, is unemployment going down? Very important thing. And B, are wages going up? I mean, that's really the thing that isn't, I think, being talked about enough, in like, as far as the economic woes of our country in general, is that there needs to be some sort of upward pressure on wages, and that needs to happen sooner than later. And I think if the government's going to be spending a bunch of money, then just include on that $15 minimum wage, if not more than that. That's what really needs to be done, on top of just the government becoming a key investor in the economy. Just like, this is the part of the what the Green New Deal, or whatever you want to call it, the huge job works program that needs to take place under the new, I don't know, Biden administration, to get the economy back off its feet. So, like, I think as far as like a political selling message, it's obviously going to be sold as something that's just going to explode the deficit. But I think there are aspects of a program like that people, this is being done for Americans, so Americans can be put to work, and make the changes in our country that need to be done. So, I mean, if Democrats really commit to something like that, I think that could be like a huge boon to them in a midterms, where even if even if the package is small, I think if you're smart about it and you're able to get the things, assuming that McConnell will let anything through at all,
Right.
that could be its own conversation again. I'm not putting it past him just to stonewall that completely and say no stimulus, outside of, I don't know, just give the money to Wall Street or something like that, or a tax cut or something like that, something that you can't benefit from right now or anything like that. But other than that, like, if something were to get through and you were to put a lot of money into people's hands that could spend that money right away, just to survive, that does have a good, that's why I think the student debt cancellation thing is such a good idea. Like, I think that's a good way to free up a lot of money in the economy that's just wasted essentially on nothing more than, I mean, that isn't a productive use of people's incomes in the economy, just paying back bank debt.
Right. Yeah.
Just isn't, like, no one disagrees with that. That money can be spent in infinitely better ways that employs someone other than just debt servicing, which is
Right. So, like, somebody saving up those the money that they pay towards their student loan debt, save up that money for a year and go to Best Buy and buy a TV. That's actively stimulating the economy.
Whatever. Yeah.
So, like, this is the other thing for me is you can't in good faith bitch about the deficit and talk about how dangerous it is when you have so recently voted for a huge tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited the high income earners in our country. So I was reading this New York Times article, opinion piece by Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel winning economist, and he kind of looked into it a little bit, and he talked about how the 2017 Trump tax cuts increased the deficit by around $300 billion. Okay, extrapolate that out over 10 years, accounting for inflation and all that, and it comes out to be just under $4 trillion. Okay, that money, that $4 trillion is enough to pay that you lose in income tax revenue is enough to pay for all of Elizabeth Warren's proposals, excluding Medicare for all, which is obviously would be a big expense, but free college education, like all these big things that people always ask, how are you going to pay for it? Like, how cool, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, like, nobody ever asks, how are you going to pay for these tax cuts? And it's because they don't pay for themselves. They pay for themselves partially, but they never fully pay for themselves. They rarely ever pay for more than 50% of the tax cuts. And people look at Reaganomics, Ronald Reagan's economic success, and what people so conveniently forget to mention is that, yeah, Reagan, when he came into office, the top tax bracket was at 70-some%. And it got dropped down to 28% or something like that. So, like, he did cut taxes, but he also raised taxes like 4 or 5 times in his administration. So, like, in even with raising taxes throughout his administration, they were still $300 and some billion short in the 80s. So it's a lot more money in today's terms of paying for themselves. Like, it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't. The idea of trickle down economics, like, it's a myth. At this point, it's like a proven myth. It just does not work. So, like, don't lecture me on deficit spending and ask me, like, how are we going to pay for people to get necessary health care, and how are we going to pay for people to get educated when the money is there? If it's just how we prioritize things. And by making that argument, you're kind of, to me at least, telling me where your priorities lie, and it just seems out of whack with what I think we should be doing.
Yeah, so I think to follow up on, like, the point of, like, politics playing in this and, like, administrations playing into deficit discussion, Reaganomics, the first time it was launched, followed up through George H.W. Bush presidency, and at the end of, and it's the reason why George Bush lost his reelection.
Yeah, he was popular.
The country was going through a recession partially because these tax cuts don't work. Rich people, when they have more money, don't go and up wages. You'd be stupid as a business owner to be saying, hey, I have more money, I don't have any more demand, because the middle class isn't getting a pay or a tax cut. So I don't have any more demand for my goods. I just have extra money. You're not going to go and spend it on raising wages or hiring new people that you don't have a demand for.
Right. What's the point?
That's just, if you really want to talk about government as a business, that makes no freaking sense. So you have the Reagan/Bush, administrations. They leave almost a $300 billion deficit, which in that times was a pretty large deficit. They leave that for Clinton. Not saying Clinton was everything to do with the surplus, but Clinton leaves with like a $250 billion surplus. George Bush comes in, $250 billion surplus, leaves with a $1.4 trillion deficit a year. Obama takes over, takes a $1.4 trillion deficit, reduces it to $600 billion deficit. Then Trump takes control with a $600 billion deficit, and there's the runs that could end next year could be a $5-6 trillion deficit. So honestly, whether even before we get into the economics and the ways of dealing with the debt, the last people that should be coming on anybody's shoulders and talking about deficits and debt are Republicans, because it doesn't work. Their philosophy on economics does not work. And we've tried it 3 times. The exact same thing has happened 3 times.
And so,
just stop with the bullshit.
and I agree. And I will say, in defense, this isn't even really defense because I'm going to make fun of them for it at the end. So whatever. But in their defense, the Bush and Trump administration's defense of running up deficits. Okay, yeah, Bush inherited a surplus. Awesome. 9/11 did happen. We went into 2 wars. So money's gonna, like, you're gonna have.
That's one of the wars we didn't need to go into, but yes, okay.
If
you're gonna take that.
Right. The argument being, like, don't go to war under false pretenses, and that's kind of it was unnecessary to do that.
Don't go to war without strategy.
Don't go to war and cut taxes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like spending was going to have to increase post 9/11, but you can't then. Okay, if spending's going to increase, then you can't cut taxes and have less tax revenue. That you're going in opposite directions of each other. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Same thing with Trump. Like, he cut taxes before COVID. Like, nobody could have seen COVID happening. But back to what I was saying earlier of, like, the tax cuts don't pay for themselves anyway. We know this. Like, they might pay for themselves partially, but not completely. So, like, it's going to, even without COVID, we wouldn't be at a $3 trillion, on the horizon, $5 trillion deficit. But I mean, before COVID, we broke $1 trillion. I think last year we had $1 trillion deficit. So, like, in the greatest economy of all time, when things of course the economy is doing great when you're running a $1 trillion deficit. Like, of course, like, absolutely. So, like, just don't, like you said, just stop with the bullshit. Like, I don't want to hear it. And furthermore, I am not against deficits at all. I am fine with the government. In my opinion, I don't ever see a reason why the government should be running a surplus. I guess, yes, to have a surplus for when the economy takes a downturn, understandable. But, like, if you're not spending every penny that you make as a government, like, that's money that could be helping people. And so the idea that we're gonna increase spending to help the corporations and the top 1%, but yet we still everybody doesn't have access to affordable healthcare. Education in inner cities in this country is embarrassing. Like, there's so many places where we can, if we're going to hold claim the mantle of, like, the greatest country on earth, then, like, we kind of have to, like, live up to that title. And there's just so many ways that we're not doing that. And a lot of ways we can do that is by increasing taxes on corporations and the wealthy. And so
capital gains.
Yeah, capital gain. Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, that is kind of the biggest, like, refuting factor in all of the like Reaganomics or anything like that. And they're going to use that money not just to, like, raise wages and whatnot, but, like, that's going to be the leading edge of whatever technology is the next cutting edge of that, and they're going to use that to reinvest in whatever industry that needs to be. But you can look at all sorts of different places in this country and see that the market, and as flush with cash as it's been, taxes are as low as they possibly could be. Like, this is all pre-COVID, obviously, in ideal conditions. They still, we still don't have, any sort of solution to, minimize carbon emissions in this country. No solution in that horizon. Meanwhile, the West Coast is burning, periodically the entire summer now. It seems like it just catches on fire and burns the entire time. So no market solution for climate change. pandemic hits, no real market solution for health insurance for all these people that's going to cover them now that they have lost their jobs. So, I mean, it's tough to see any sort of real justification for all this unused capital that sits out there in the name of tax cuts to solve all these problems of society when, in real crunch time, we don't really have any sort of solutions to look towards, and instead we just have a government with a huge deficit, and we wonder why we can't do anything of
Right.
real
So
merit for anything.
To be fair, I don't want to hear the argument about climate change ever again, because a friend of mine, she mentioned that in 10 years, Florida will probably be underwater. And after this last election, good.
fair.
Take care of that.
No, kind of to what you were talking about, Bork, like the free market being the end all be all of just being better at everything. Like the free market will find a solution. Like the Adam Smith's invisible hand, theory of the market will figure things out without government intervention and blah blah blah. Like, yeah, why is it that we haven't? Like, it's not like these wildfires have become more intense, but it's not like it's a new thing. Like, if the free market it's so ridiculous.
It wouldn't have gotten to this point where
right, exactly.
we have to rebuild certain portions, but the money isn't it. The money wasn't there to it. It makes there's way more money in keeping the way things are currently right now. And unless you're willing to use the government to subsidize or, regulate these things out of usage, which, are the two leading things right now, either we subsidize green energy so much that it's so cheap that, it prices fossil fuels out of the market, or we regulate them and just fully eliminate, internal combustion engines that run on fossil fuels.
Yeah. And
wait a sec. I thought we solved forest fires with cleaning the forest floor.
Yeah, that introduces a different problem of invasive species, believe it or not.
Oh, wait. Talking about a country full of simpletons, you don't think that, a simple answer like raking the floor was going to, induce good results?
Fair.
Yeah.
Also, just real quick, just to for anybody watching that disagrees with everything we're saying, this next part is directed right at you, because this idea that the government is not efficient and the free market is just much more efficient than the government. Okay, there are vast instances of that being true. Fair. However, like you look at these, like Silicon Valley, these Googles and just all these big tech companies out in Silicon Valley. What they've built their empires off of was government research into semiconductors, and just like it was government research led. Same thing with advancements in the health industry with the NIH. Like the government does all of this research on health related, disease and all these things. And then it's private companies that are able to use that research and then profit off of. So like it's not like to make it seem like the government just never does anything well or right or efficient is just so insanely, like Social Security is one of the most impressively incredible things that any government has ever put forth. Like it brought so many elderly people up out of poverty and gave them like a living, like dignity, like later in life. And so the idea that like government can't do things well or efficient, it's so ridiculous.
Actually, to expand on that, if anybody, and it kind of ties in with the deficit talk and talk about having rich people pay their taxes, there's a good speech by Elizabeth Warren. She's made the speech 1,000 times about why doubling down on giving big companies incentives is ridiculous. Is a lot of those companies have, bolstered and boomed because of tax-paid, initiatives like, airports and roadways and, all that stuff like Google, Tesla, those companies would not be, Amazon would not be where they are without strong government investments in, transportation
Right.
and police and just multiple other things but I digress. Elizabeth Warren has a very good speech about why the idea to give them tax breaks is actually doubling, they're double dipping on taxpayer money.
Right. And going back, like this idea of tax cuts, and they're going to pay for themselves, and like it's people will do better. They know better what to do with their money than the government does. Well, there are the idea that like tax cuts are going to pay for themselves. Okay. They do partially, but you're going to get a much, much, much larger return on your investment if you were to put that towards universal child care. Like if take the money that is given in tax cuts and put it towards, just one example of universal child care, you're going to get more people in the workforce because they don't have to stay home, and one parent doesn't have to stay home and watch their child, so that frees them up to go work in the economy. Also, it's going to just lead generally to like better young people, and like people who are healthier and more educated when they're younger are going to be more productive adults later in life, and more productive leads to more money in the economy. Like it just there's so many better ways to go about this than just the super like unnuanced talking points that come out of all this of the deficit's out of control, we have to cut spending, and like
You have to give tax cuts while doing all this.
right, yeah, exactly. Like that's what really like all this talking we're doing really comes down to the fact that we had significant tax cuts a few years ago, and there was it was mum for everybody in the Republican Party regarding those tax cuts and how we were going to pay for them, and what effect this was going to have on the deficit and the economy. So, I mean, I'm just kind of tired of hearing it. Like, yes, the deficit is going to continue to grow over the next year, probably 2 years under Biden, and that's okay. Like that is it's necessary and it's fine. Provided that it's for the right reasons, which I think that it will be. I'm off my soapbox.
Fucking Bears.
Sorry, Joe, to take you away from your Bears game this evening.
Well, it looks like it was better used, or time was better used talking about this.
Yeah, we could have guessed that, but
shut up.
Sorry. But okay, yeah. Do you guys have any last thoughts on deficit spending and the hysteria that is going to ensue in the next 9 months over it?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see deficit hawks start emerging in the Democratic Party, especially given how beholden to certain sectors of the new Democratic coalition there potentially could be to moderate GOPers. You could see a real address to, I've already seen in the Hill today, Biden's first 100 days, one of the big fixes he could do would be solving the Social Security issue, which exactly what that's code for, solving that,
privatization,
privatizing Social Security, means testing it even more. Yeah, so that is the nightmare, that if a Democratic president is the one who touches one of the entitlement programs, that could be an absolute disaster.
Opens the floodgates type of thing.
Yeah, that could be an absolute disaster for any sort of hopes for any sort of democratic project, whether that is the center neoliberals or the left of any project. If they get painted as screwing up one of the good things that the government does, that'll be a problem.
So let me ask you this here, kind of as a parting question. So we know we have, the benefit of hindsight with the Obama administration and the stimulus not being aggressive enough. And not to say that the economy didn't do well under Obama, it did, but it didn't. And we didn't come out of the recession as quickly as we could have. And because of that, Republicans kind of pointed to that, saying like their plan isn't working, even though it was, oddly enough, the Republicans were the reason why we weren't able to have a more aggressive stimulus. Do you foresee a similar thing happening with Biden?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Was TARP passed under Obama, or was TARP passed under Bush still, technically? And then Obama said he was going to sign whatever came out.
That's a good question. I've always been under the impression that it was Obama that.
Okay, so I mean, it will be a different case in that instance, because Obama.
The reason I say that real quick, the reason I say that is in Ben Rhodes' book, he talks about. I think it was Ben Rhodes' book. He talks about how they came into the administration with the mindset of we're gonna work with Republicans and we're gonna so that's why they compromised on the level that the stimulus was going to be. So that's largely why I've always been under the impression.
Right. No. Yeah. That is kind of. It's not that level of meltdown.
Right.
It doesn't. Wall Street hasn't had to close yet as a result of.
Right.
One of the, or I guess not just one at that point, only one of, but multiple were on the way of. Major investment banks and commercial banks were on their way of going bankrupt, which would have, I think everybody kind of understood the urgency that a financial crisis of that magnitude had, implications for everybody to be, Wall Street goes down for that long at that level, that has implications that no party, I think, wants to deal with. That could, Trump only a million times worse arises from situations like that.
Right.
Well, I don't think anybody wanted to, they understood the urgency of that. This time around, it doesn't seem like, we're at the same, everybody doesn't agree that the economy is in the dire straits that it is. It seems like everybody is kind of, if it weren't for the Democrats scaring everybody and testing everybody, that the economy would be running just fine right now. And
yeah,
it doesn't matter that, there's, maps that say that there's, uncontrolled community spread right now, and contract chasers are having a difficult time tracking people down because they know people are lying to them. It seems like the ground is just so different on what to be even expected. So, I always thought it would be kind of a sure thing that COVID thing would get done right away, but I guess it's not even out of the possibility that if these Georgia seats go to the Republicans, that they just don't even play ball on a COVID bill.
So
that they just pass the bare minimum of what they would need to pass to keep the government running, and then okay,
right.
No, we're fine. There is no real. We have the vaccine now, and we can start the economy back up again. So let's go.
So if I understand you, correct me if I'm wrong. Even the fact that Obama's situation was so dire, and everybody was pretty, for the most part, more or less on board with the necessity of having a stimulus plan. Mm-hmm. And and even with that understanding, they still weren't able to pass a aggressive enough stimulus. The fact that there's not a consensus right now on the need for aggressive
Right.
stimulus. That
Yeah.
if I'm understanding correctly, you think it's going to be less likely for the correct amount of stimulus to happen with Biden than
Right. Yeah. And it's probably going to even need to be a bigger amount than what Obama passed
Yeah.
for that. I mean,
Yeah. No, absolutely.
that
I think it
that
absolutely
money
will.
that money essentially just went to bail out the banks and
Auto
then like the
industry.
auto industry.
Yeah.
But like there could have been a bunch of money to pass to keep people in their homes and forgive a bunch of the bad all the bad loans that the bankers had written themselves and had co-signed on, that these people could pay this money back, which is kind of an aside the point of that
Right.
whole fiasco. But that would I don't even know what that kind of dollar amount would have been required to forgive all of those loans and keep people in their homes for that. I mean, we've forgiven, or not forgiven, but put on hold a bunch of people's rents and mortgage payments, but those are going to come due at some point. So what are we going to do about that?
Right.
I mean, that's another thing that has to be addressed at some point. Hopefully we're hoping through legislation that was just going to be, okay, yep, here's a bunch of money that we should have been giving you throughout this entire crisis, but we didn't. I think everybody was kind of assuming that was going to happen, but
right. Which is
if
where
Republicans act like Republicans, then you can't definitely assume that at all.
right. And so that essentially, this is kind of wrapping up to what I was thinking is essentially what's going to happen is the adults are going to get in the room. They're going to decide, okay, yeah, this is what we need to have happen. Rent forgiveness, stuff like that. Like these people who own these apartment buildings and stuff, like these land, like they need their money. Like they have an obligation to the bank too. So like it's going to end up being the government is going to cut them a check. It's going to be it's going to be a very, very large check, and it's going to occur under the Biden administration. Spending is going to go up even more, and then in 2022 midterms and 2024 general election, it is going to be a look at the fiscal irresponsibility of the Democrats and exploding our deficit, even though the cause of all of this, in my humble opinion, even though I'm correct, is that it was the inaction of Republicans throughout this entire coronavirus, and then their inability to enact the necessary amount of stimulus, because stimulus will come. It's just a matter of is it enough to really dig us out of this hole. And honestly, I agree with you. I don't think things are quite as bad as they were, and like the dollar figures are bigger, but it's 10 years later.
It sounds like I'm saying things aren't as bad. Things are worse than they are now. But the perception,
the perception of it. Yeah, exactly.
It's not as collectively seen as, oh my, no one was saying, oh, this is fine. Things aren't as bad as, no, you see like, I can't remember which Bank of America or whichever one ended up going down. Like you see one of those banks going bankrupt.
Lehman Brothers.
Thank you. You see Lehman Brothers going bankrupt, and no one can say like that happens sometimes.
Right.
That's a normal occurrence every day. Like no one could play that off as someone playing politics to benefit one person or the other.
So
whereas now it seems like that's up in the air.
So set your calendar reminder or whatever for 2 years from now, a little less than 2 years from now, for the midterms, and then again for 2 years after that for the general election. And we will revisit this topic on what the talking points coming out of the Republican Party are regarding deficits and the debt and all these things. And I will bet you a lot of money that deficit spending is going to become a talking point issue within the next year for Republicans.
Just imagine Trump's Twitter. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, look at his Twitter before he became president about deficit spending and stuff, and then before Corona, it's so ridiculous. Like, it's so hypocritical. It's just the hypocrisy is insane.
Yeah, we've beat the dead horse.
Yeah, it's crazy.
This is how the economy works. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Make sure all of you guys subscribe, follow, share, like. They're on the middle of your screen there, Moose Club Pod, and then look for our episodes on Spotify. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for watching.